Hello, can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Let me just trying to figure out my camera. One second. One of the things that really surprises me every time we talk to people like him, for me, I've been watching his videos, and it's like, oh, I'm talking to Adrian. This is crazy, and they all say the same thing. But
Yeah.
because I think for us, we're a very small team. We were two people, and now we're three. Um, but of course we do a lot of work for Watchfinder just for the broader business in terms of marketing and stuff, and the YouTube channel is like the bit that we get to do, the fun bit at the end of the day, if you like. But we've been doing this whole thing just in isolation, really, just at Watchfinder, making videos, never really meeting people. And it's only really been since the end of lockdown and Watches and Wonders that we've actually started talking to people. So we say, oh, it's really cool to speak to you. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's really cool to speak to you. And I'm like, is it?
No, you don't understand the magnitude of where you stand in the watch world because, like you said, the watch community, the enthusiast world is very niche place. So I've been following your channel for like since 4 years, and my interest in watches, I've always been interested in watches, but I never really knew what I was wearing. Like, I didn't know the difference between quartz and mechanical. I didn't know the difference between fashion brands versus traditional brands. I was just putting it on as part of my outfit. So I've been doing that since I was like 6 years old. I had a Casio, green Casio. But it was only until since like 2017 and 18 when I really discovered your channel. I discovered Urban Gentry, and I was like, wow, okay, there's a whole community out there. And the way that you talked about watches was very different at the time compared to other channels where they were just reviewing watches, but you were really getting into this the romanticize, the storytelling behind it. And I was like, okay, wow, there's a whole universe. It's not just a product that companies are selling to make money. It's actually a very personal connection that people are building with these things. It's really an enormous honor for me to have you on the channel. I'm just about to hit 1,000 subscribers,
Oh,
so within a few
congratulations.
days, I'm just like, it's really exciting stuff going on. And then having you on the channel at this stage, I was not expecting. I thought I would have to work 3 years before I can, at least for like make 100 videos before I can reach out to people like you. But this is, I can retire on this video. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those situations. If you don't ask, you don't get. And I've been making an effort recently. I've created my own Instagram account to talk to people and get to know people because I've realised myself in the past few months that people do want to talk to me. I've been squirreling away with
Duh.
in the Watchfinder basement making videos, and it's only recently become apparent that people are actually watching them. So yeah, it's great to talk to you. Hopefully, I don't create a rod for my own back and blow up my Instagram inbox with requests. But it's lovely to talk to people around the world, and it's to me genuinely it's a privilege to talk to people who kind of know about the stuff that I've done, and kind of share with them the conversation and talk to you. So thank you very much, all the way from Malaysia. It's really fascinating
No
and fun.
worries. My pleasure. I'm actually from Pakistan and I'm sitting in Malaysia. And I can tell you one thing honestly, you might not realize, like I said, the magnitude of your presence on the watch community, because, like, there aren't that many channels and there aren't that many people educating about watches. So you're very well known in Malaysia, in Singapore, in the Asian market, in the watch market. You are very well known. We in our on our WhatsApp groups, on our Facebook groups, we're constantly sharing your videos and Teddy Baldassar and these kind of, oh yeah, he's just talking about this watch, like, check it out. And it's a very active community in Asia especially. So you're one of the big names that comes up all the time.
Oh, stop it! You're making me blush. It's
Ah.
so cool. It's so cool. It really is. Like it never. I don't think it will ever get old. Hearing that people enjoy the content that we make. So thank you very much. Hopefully we can have more of a presence in Asia and Malaysia specifically, because they're places I'd really like to go to, and it sounds like a great excuse to visit.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. A lot of new brands, they are coming out of Asia. Like, lots of micro brands are starting up in Singapore, in Malaysia, Ming, Boulder, Zelos. I think a lot of these brands
Yeah.
are starting to, because one thing to know about Singapore specifically is that they're very experimental. It's the place where a lot of even higher end independent brands, they like to start off there, coming all the way from Switzerland, because they feel that Singaporeans are a bit more explorative and adventurous when it comes to watch brands. So that's the place where, you know, they will appreciate independence and micro brands and new crazy stuff, you know. So yeah, definitely it's a very ambitious market.
Yeah, it's great to see, because obviously competing with the Swiss market, there are so much history and heritage that you can't just create overnight. So you have to go in a different direction, and it's seeing some of the personalities emerging from Asia, the independent watchmakers, and then some of the brands that are creating. I see you're wearing your Sega design. You know, that heralds in that direction, and it's just great stuff. It's really, really, really good to see imaginative thinking, stuff that takes me by surprise, coming from Asia.
Exactly. And I just coming to this point, I wanted to ask you something, because I've seen some of your predictions that you're doing on Rolex, on a lot of you know, the industry, and those are, I think, based on the patterns that you've analyzed. I think a lot of it is very, very, like, yeah, I can see that happening. But I'm also seeing another trend these days, and I think you must have noticed as well. Previously, like few years, even 5 years ago, brands like MB&F, Jacob and Co, these are very, very eclectic brands. Nobody, like, they're very small handful of people who would appreciate those brands. But most of them would still go the safer route and go with the traditional three-hand watches, or the, you know, the complications. But now we are seeing more and more new brands, and not just high-end independent brands like Jorn, but also micro brands, Sega, doing the same thing. Do you see that? Do you think that there's a demand for this that's happening, or is this just a very experimental thing that they're doing? Like, do you actually see consumers getting bored or getting fatigued by the traditional watch brands, and they actually want to see innovation in these kind of places?
What I think, it boils down to a number of things from different aspects of the market. So the high-end collector, those guys who, you know, they've got all the money in the world, and so price isn't an object. It's really about exclusivity, isn't it? Owning something that their friends don't, so they can go, no, I've got the thing and you haven't. They've already bought all of the vintage Rolex and all of the vintage Patek. That's done now. That's all squirreled away in safes around the world. And so they looked for the next thing, and the next thing was, well, pretty much FB Journe, wasn't it? Journe created a brand around a personality, around a style that was very recognizable, and those now are so collectible. Even now with the Chronometre Bleu, which was a watch that you could purchase for a reasonable sum at one point, can't get it. You cannot get it.
Definitely.
And I think that has really sprung an excitement for the independent watchmaker, the man who's not from 2 centuries ago, who's dead in the ground a long time, but the man who is here now, making watches where you as a collector can get in on the ground floor and potentially even have an influence in what those watches become. Custom variations of watches that will one day become the enormously collectible pieces of the future. And that interest and that rise of the independent watchmaker, as with all things collectible, it's collectors who kickstarted the idea of Rolex being very popular, and now that us mere mortals all want Rolex too. And the same is going to happen, and is happening, with the independents. Interesting, innovative watchmaking from fresh minds who are doing things in their own way. And we want that too. But we can't necessarily afford the FB Journes and all of that kind of stuff. So you will see other independent brands who can source their watchmaking from cheaper places, using kind of cheaper methods, but still giving us a flavour of that. So some of the brands you're talking about, like Zelos, you can buy a sapphire cased watch from them and have your full-on Richard Mille type experience for a lot less money. And for me, like, the opportunity for choice is amazing. People kind of bemoan the fact that you can't buy Rolex anymore, but there's more choice than there has ever been. And that for me personally, and I hope this is true for the wider watch collecting community as well, because I feel it so strongly, is that it's reinvigorated my interest in watches. Like, there's so much, and so seeing MB&F grow up over the last decade or so, where they were a niche watchmaker that made these crazy things, and everyone was like, "What is that?" Now they can drop a new edition of a legacy machine, and everyone goes, and it just hits the front page straight away. We in the watch industry, we kind of sit quite a long way behind other industries in terms of our willingness to accept new trends and things. But I really think now is the time of that independent watchmaker, and it's just spread far and wide.
Exactly. Like, even in terms of, if you see, if you look at the traditional historic brands with heritage, right? Rolexes and Pateks and Vacheron, APs. Those are, of course, the higher end ones. But even brands like Omega and Tissot, they had their innovative moments decades ago. That's when
Yeah.
they were like, every brand was coming out with something very different. And then for many decades, it just died down. You know, we stopped seeing crazy innovation, because it was like, okay, everything's been done. Whatever the market needs, whatever the consumer needs in terms of complication. Now it was just a moment, a few decades of just improvements. So with every new movement, and then there's a bit of accuracy improvement, there's a bit of change in materials and things like that. But eventually I feel that now is actually a great time for micro brands, for independent brands to really shine on innovation. And that's something I see that is quite amazing, because if you don't have heritage, you at least have to have innovation. That's what separates you from those really low quality, fashion brands that they don't have heritage, but they also don't have innovation. They're just doing mass production in a very soulless way, right? But seeing this kind of excitement, like it does bring out excitement even in non-watch people who don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money on high-end watches, but also in terms of competing with Apple Watch, because Apple Watch is huge. And the whole reason why a lot of people are going for that is because it comes back with these so many features and colors and strap options and all of these kind of things. So having something like this, it's a head turner. Like, what is that? You're wearing a spaceship on your wrist. But yeah, you can pick this up for almost, a bit, maybe a slightly more than an Apple Watch. Like, it's quite interesting now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I was talking to someone the other day who isn't particularly interested in watches, and I was, trying to do the spiel, and the question I often get is how is something like a Rolex worth so much? But when someone sees an MB&F legacy machine, and you tell them that it's £150,000, they go, "Oh, that's a lot of money," but they don't think it's too much money for the watch. They see the watch and think it's just an insane looking thing, and of course it's worth a huge amount. Whereas they would struggle more to see a Rolex being worth £10,000, or in the secondary market higher. And the Sega design that you're wearing there carries so much of the essence of a legacy machine, in that smooth pebble shape, in the curve, in the interest in the dial, in the way it looks different. So the fact that you can purchase a flavour of one of the most epic watches out there from an independent and enjoy it for that price is what makes me excited. Like, you have the aspiration, but you also have the accessibility as well. It's true of the traditional market too, like with Tudor and Rolex, but I own a Black Bay 58 now, but it took me a long time to purchase it, because ultimately it's quite a boring watch. It's a great watch, but it's pretty boring.
Yeah.
It does everything very, very well and very, very under the radar, but the windows I stop in when I walk past are the ones that have got Grubel Forces in them and Allwerks, and you stop and you stare at them and you think, what is that? That's incredible. And it makes me ultimately, it just makes me feel like a kid. And that's, if I had all the money in the world, that's what my safe would be full of, is that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's another thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Like, I've seen, the relationship between architectural design and watchmaking. There's just so much deeper connection there, because I've I'm coming from architectural background, so I see everything from architectural glasses, from that perspective. Everything has a context, everything has a reason, and we look at spaces, we look at cities and how things are navigated. And the same can be applied on a very micro scale on watches. So in terms of, and this is the thing that people don't really understand, they just associate the Bauhaus design with with architecture. Like if you want a watch that is inspired by architecture, okay, there's Junghans and there's Nomos, and that's it. But you are looking at a very, very minimalist style, which was, it came out of the World War II, after World War II, after the whole economic crash of the world. And now there was a time that, okay, we need to minimize our spending. We can't have the Victorian design and the ornamentation. We need to have essentials only. So it all became about function first, function follows form. But when I look at architecture like Zaha Hadid and Frank Gehry, like those crazy designs, and I look at what was the brand for Gribble Forsey, right?
Gribble Forsey,
I and even H. Moser, I see a lot of similarities in terms of the design language and the mindset of innovation, of problem solving, of coming up with new ideas in this very small space. So it's quite fascinating to see it in that way as well. And I wish more people talk about this. There's so much philosophical part that to uncover here.
There really is. And coming from a civil engineering background myself, I've sat through many a long, boring meeting with you architects talking about the colours of door handles and things. But for me, one of the fundamental aspects of watch design, whether it's very, very traditional and simple or very, very complex, is proportions. And if you were to boil down what is architecture, what is being an architect, it's all about understanding proportions of things, whether it's the height of a worktop or the scale of a building and its interaction with its landscape. It's all about understanding that, and you could boil it down to numbers if you want, but it's really about a feel. It's about a reaction that people have when they see it and when they interact with it, whether or not they realize it or not. More often, it's a case of you don't realize it when it's good, you do realize when it's bad. And that is so true of watches. You can just see. You don't have to be someone who has design experience to look at a watch and know that it's bad.
Yeah.
You don't know why it's bad, but you know that something feels off.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right with the architectural aspect. Working within those proportions to create a high quality product is very, very difficult in watches because there's so little to work with, isn't there?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
so when you have something like a Patek Philippe, who are masters of proportion, although they have had their slip-ups every now and then, and you try and explain why that is such a complicated thing, it's really, really difficult. Someone thinks, well, it's just a couple of hands and some markers. Take Langenzoner, for example. You think it's very, very simple, but the proportions are so considered. And then on the other end of the scale, you have things like the Grubel Forces of the world, the Ullwerks and things like that. And they can very easily be chaos if they weren't properly proportioned. And we do see that. There are some watch brands where you think, this looks like it should look like an MB&F or a Grubel Forsey, but something about it just makes it feel cluttered and messy. And it's not that it's complicated. There are other complicated watches out there that look beautiful and just serene and well considered, but they're still complicated. And I would love to understand more of my reaction to them. I can go, or but I don't really know why.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about... Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, we talk a lot about watchmakers, but very rarely do we really hear about the watch designers.
Exactly. Even when it comes to what the prices that are set for watches, we can say that, what you mentioned earlier, that people don't understand why Rolexes are so expensive. But have you thought about the spending of design? How much time does it take for a designer to come up with the perfect proportions, to come up with the perfect the sizing, the design, the overall silhouette, and the framing, and all of those kind of things, it's a lot of work. And I feel that people, they never consider that. They look at a watch and they look at the movement, they look at specifications basically, right? Okay, it's made of this material, it has this movement, it has a sapphire crystal. Why is it I can find the same specs for a watch that costs $500 less, so why should I go for that? But are you actually considering the design that's gone into that watch, into making that original design? Because again, like we discussed, like there's not that much that we can do on our wrist. Like we can't just have a triangle there, like crazy shapes, you know. We still have to work with the very limited parameters. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by the evolution of Rolex because it is so slow and so painstaking. And I suppose when you think about the numbers of watches that they sell, when you make a change and it has an incremental percentage difference in the negative, that is an enormous impact on the business as a whole. You have to think of Rolex as a volume producer and a luxury producer, which is very, very unusual in this space. But also, what really fascinates me about their evolution of design is the recent change to the 41mm Submariner, shrinking the lugs a little bit, changing just some of the very small proportions. And it's so unusual to see Rolex almost admitting a mistake there. People love the ceramic Submariner, but people always complained about the bluff lugs and the thicker crown guards, and they have changed that. And I never thought I would see Rolex doing that. It's bizarre.
Yeah, there is this thing that I've realized, and I've been observing this on social media as well. Every time a new tutor comes in, even a little bit of incremental change, and people go crazy over it. And this, I feel that this can be a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. The good thing can be like, okay, if somebody wanted this watch in a smaller size, now they have a chance to go for it, which is fine. Or somebody who has, they have the wealth and they have the finances and they can afford to have, you know, they want every Tudor model and they want every H. Moser, they can go for that as well. That's fine. But the negative side of this is the pressure that one person feels, like a collector feels, that if I don't get that, it's going to affect my happiness. Like my happiness depends on me getting that watch. And what happens with that is that you might have a few 4, 5, 10 good watches with good heritage, and you're now looking down on them and thinking that until I get that watch, I'm not going to be happy. And I think this is it's a bit related to consumer mindset, but I feel that is something that we need to start to appreciate our watches, and we need to be careful about this, not to fall into that side, because it happens all of a sudden. You don't really see it coming. Like these watches are built to last more than your own lifetime, but we are treating them like fashion accessories, like fashion clothes. You know, we just you wear them for a few years, you dump them. Yeah. What are your thoughts about this? Have you experienced this thing ever?
Yeah, I mean, in my own personal experience, it takes me a very long time to buy anything. I'm probably even slower than Rolex is at developing new watches, at buying them. And that's generally because I'm conscious of the price. I'm conscious of the value of the thing that I would be selling to buy the new watch. I'm quite unusual in this sphere, in the sense that I don't like to have more than one. I currently do have more than one watch. In fact, I have 4. But I feel bad about having more than one watch.
Yeah.
And you know, the new watch is the one that you tend to wear the most anyway. 2 of the watches I have, one is a pocket watch, which is more of a desk ornament, and the other is my Casio, which I smash around in. But I still have my Grand Seiko, and I have my Tudor as well. And I don't think anything any less of the Grand Seiko. I still think it's a lovely watch. And I enjoy my Tudor as well, and I enjoy them in different ways. But I do certainly feel that having both at the same time is an excess. But my wife insists that I should keep the Grand Seiko and that I should stop being silly. So in thinking about that, I kind of, when it comes to not just watches, but when it comes to just things that you like, I don't subscribe to the idea that buying things doesn't make you happy. Like, it does.
No,
it really does. I enjoy buying things. I enjoy researching them. I enjoy trying them on. I enjoy getting excited about them, talking about them, and enjoy experiencing them as well. But that also doesn't mean that that thing is going to stay with you forever and ever. And so I think the real balance is rule 1, can you afford it? Don't be silly. Rule 2, is it making you happy?
Yeah.
If you've worn it for a few years and you think, oh, I'm bored of that now, don't feel guilty about selling it. But also, if you do want to buy something new and you think, oh, I think that will make me happy, great, give it a try. But always with the common sense that the grass isn't always greener, that if you're seeking some desperate inner happiness because you feel you feel like a darkness inside, watches aren't going to fix that. It is just a bit of fun. It really is just a bit of fun. Understanding the measure of happiness that you will get from this hobby is very, very important. And once you realise those things and you see it for the kind of the bit of fun that it is and take it less seriously, then some of those issues with the upgrade-itis that people have and the desperation to get the new thing and that kind of collector mentality, which can become almost obsessive, that starts to fade away. And you'll notice from the conversations that I have with Tom in the podcast, like, we don't take watches too seriously and we enjoy them all the more for it because it's just so much more relaxed. If you don't find collecting is making you happy anymore, you're doing it wrong. Yeah.
I think another thing is also the Instagram effect, you know. I've started to realize that, like, the watches I wanted, like the next watch that I want or the collection that I want to keep, started to get affected by the pictures that I saw on Instagram and what other people are collecting. I'm not there now anymore because I don't think like that. But there was a stage where, and that's why I'm talking about this, that this is a very slippery slope where people can go into, and it's just about self-acceptance and like you said, based on what you can afford and your lifestyle and your priorities, we can still be enthusiasts and watch enthusiasts and learn about them and learn about history. We don't need to have every single thing that we like, and that's completely fine as well. We can save up for it, for something that we want, and that can be part of our, you know, success story kind of thing. And I have a few grails that I do wish, you know, I do hope to get someday, but I'm not there yet, and I'm completely fine. I'm happy with the watches that I have right now. I'm just enjoying. So yeah, it was just something I wanted to get off my chest and have, like, nobody's talking about this, you know, nobody's talking about this this dangerous side of, you know, the psychological impacts of watches, of watch collecting in particular, that it can consume you, you know.
Yeah, and I think broadly speaking, that's the overlap with social media, isn't it? Social media and the internet at large has the ability to connect you with so much information, but ultimately we're not wired to be able to deal with all that information, so it can be overwhelming and in a detrimental way. And again, giving yourself space and giving yourself the mentality that you're going to enjoy watches on Instagram in order to appreciate what other people have and enjoy it in an experiential way, not to spend the whole time thinking that my life is terrible and their life is great.
What are your recommendation in terms of resources to learn about watches? Because so far what I've been doing is I'm just using YouTube as my main source of learning about watches, which I think it's not the best place because it's still very opinionated. But if somebody was to they wanted to learn about watches, what is the best place that you would recommend apart from your channel?
I wouldn't listen to that, it's rubbish. I think the real important thing is less about where you look, because of course I would say generally the internet or books or the brand's websites themselves. I think the most important thing is to take a journalistic approach, which it sounds boring, but that is to check your sources and to check other sources to make sure the information is corroborated. Because there are so many resources that will quote something and it's not necessarily correct, it's not quite right, and then you might find that other places quote the same number because their source quoted it wrong, and even some brands, they will say things that other brands will contest, such as when the first function was created and things as well. So I think really good places to go are forums. Reddit there's a great subreddit on there about watches. There are a number of different great watch forums around the world as well, alongside the press releases that brands release about their new watches. But otherwise, it's a real mishmash. There's no one place to go. You just kind of go everywhere and accumulate knowledge over time. And after a while, you start to learn which facts you thought you knew aren't actually quite as true as you thought they were. And you start to kind of pull back some of the layers and reveal the real stories. And I can only really attribute time to that. Just time spent in the hobby absorbing the knowledge. You're never going to jump straight in there and just find the idiot's guide to watches and just read all that and know everything. It's such an old and complex and political industry that the waters are so muddy that you can't see through them. And that for me is a really big part of the fun of it. People talk about Rolex potentially being boring, but the exploration of Rolex and the way it created its brand as a relatively young brand, but comparatively, was fascinating to learn about. So, for example, you would go to Rolex's website and it says, we created the first waterproof watch. And you're like, oh, okay, I'll take that at face value. Rolex says it must be true. But then you find out the technology they use had been previously used in pocket watches in the mid-1800s. And what they mean is the first wristwatch to use it in that capability. And you go, that's kind of clever. That's kind of clever. And I've said this before, I liken them very much to Apple in producing existing technology, but in a way that is packaged much better. And so the long answer to your question there really is that just read everything. Read everything. Go onto all the forums, read all of the brand material, listen to all the YouTube videos, and ultimately, if you get through all of that and you still enjoy it, then you're a watch enthusiast because you haven't been put off by sheer boredom.
And also spending time with the watches themselves. So, meeting up with other enthusiasts or being part of the community and getting hands-on with a lot of watches really changes your perspective on certain things. Like for me, I've heard amazing thing about Longines in terms of, best value or rather good value for mid-range Swiss watch. But when I see them in person, for my wrist, they never work. I have, except maybe the Heritage, the one with the sector dial. That's, I would say, maybe one of those kind of like the vintage inspired ones. But their sports models, they never work on my wrist. It's just something about them, and coming back to proportions, And that's why everybody is on this journey on their own, because we can hear the good things about Longines by other people, and those definitely will be true, or more or less will be true. But when you experience them, you're going to have a different experience from the rest. Those factors might either not work for you, they might not resonate with you, and you won't really know that until you put it on your wrist. This watch, the Sega design, when I saw this in the release photos and the press release, and even on your channel, I thought, wow, that's going to be a plate on the wrist. It's going to be huge. And even reading the specs, I imagined it to be a very chunky, giant watch, but I have tiny wrists. I have like 6.2, 6.3 inch wrist. And it doesn't look bad. It doesn't hang, because there are no lugs. So it sits quite well, I would say. It can, and this is I would never have realized this until I actually went there to the store and experienced the watch myself. I was like, okay, it's actually smaller than what it reads as. And I think that's a very important part of the watch enthusiast journey, that you don't have to buy every single thing, but just trying to get out there and seeing these things in person and forming your own opinion. I think that's a very good exercise to be able to do.
I sometimes see these posts from people, and they say, "Oh, I've only been into watches for 6 months, and I've bought 10 watches since." And it interests me because it's so polar opposite to my behaviour. And if I were to analogize it, I would say that if you went to a high quality restaurant with your friends, you wouldn't get there at 8 o'clock and eat everything as fast as you possibly could, pay the bill and leave. You want to spend as many hours with your friends, enjoying the food, talking about it, taking a bite, having a sip of drink, talking, sharing, and make it an occasion, an event. And you want it to last as long as it possibly can, because it's a great thing. And that for me is the same as collecting watches. The discovery, enjoy it. Enjoy learning about all these new pieces. Don't rush to buy one of them straight away. See what else is out there. You find a new corner, explore that a bit further. Talk about it with other like-minded people. Go and see those things. Try them on. Go and try them on again in another couple of weeks, and just enjoy that process. Savor each moment. Because when you rush to buy it and then you have a box of 10 watches and no story to tell, those watches then do have less value to you. When you spend 6 months reading everything on the internet about a specific watch, and then you purchase it, every time you look at it, you remember those 6 months and all the places that you went to and you saw it in the jeweler's window, all of the people that you met and all of the things you read and all the things you found out. And then the weight of it is so much more important to you.
Yeah.
So, like I was saying, with this Black Bay 58, I've had it a year now, I think. But the first time I tried it on was, I think, like 3 years ago or something like that, whenever it first came out. And I've stopped in different jewelers and I've tried it on. I've tried it on at Watchfinder. And the moments, so I would be on holiday and I'd stop and I'd try it on. And I have the memory of that place and trying it on. So when I look at this watch, I think, oh, do you remember when I first tried this on and I thought XYZ in this place? And it just makes the watch have so much more character for me. So,
Exactly.
yeah. Don't eat all your lunch at once.
Yeah.
Savor it.
This is a 16-year-old Swatch. Irony. It's around $50, I think. It's $50, and I've had this for over 16 years, still running. So I mean, this is not the Moon Swatch quality. I can definitely guarantee you that. Nothing. The pushers haven't fallen out or anything. Like the crown hasn't fallen out. But the memories I have, I wore this watch on my graduation. I wore it at school. I went through so many stages of my life. There's so many memories associated with it. And this was at a time when I wasn't into watches as an enthusiast. I didn't, like I said, I didn't even know the history of Swatch. But to me, this was just cool because this was my first Swiss watch. And at that time, like, oh wow, it's a Swiss-made watch. Like I didn't even know how expensive they can get, but there was just this buzz that Swiss-made watch means that it's an amazing watch, right? So
Yeah.
Just that understanding of that thing and the memories associated with it is just such a powerful piece. This is, I would say, it's more powerful than anything I can ever buy, regardless of the price. And that's what I mean about sentimentality, that the connection that we build with watches. I don't own anything else in my life right now that's like as old as this, in terms of, I'm not carrying my 15-year-old shoes and my 15-year-old clothes with me right now. But this is something that I was wearing when I was a kid, and I'm still wearing it right now. And it just takes me back to those days. So this is why I realized that this is it's not overhyped, it's not exaggerated. The connection that we have with these watches, they can be a very powerful tool.
Yeah, they really serve as bookmarks in your life, and that's really down to, like, they give back as much as you put into them. And so I think someone could go out there and spend millions of pounds on the craziest watches by walking into the shop and going, yep, all of those, put them in a box, send them to my hotel room. And those watches will feel soulless to them.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that, when your watch journey really kickstarts and you start bringing in sponsorship and you start making a bit of money, and then, a few years down the line, you go to a shop and that watch that you've been looking at for all of that time, the thing you've been working for, you buy it. It's not this watch has the value that I purchased and saved up for. It's like this watch is the culmination of that entire journey to get there, and it will just add so much more value than anything that you can just walk out there and buy. So it doesn't really matter about the value. The value is kind of what's safe for you, but that journey, that memory, and that accomplishment is, I think, why mechanical watches continue to survive today and why they're so powerful for people.
This kind of ties it back to the whole happiness part that I was talking about in the beginning. That, yeah, I think this is the secret to that that people need to realize about the watches that they have. Like, spend, even if you have 10 watches, make time with them, spend time with these watches, and give them wrist time. And yeah, like if you're bored of them, it's fine, no guilt there. But as long as you like them, this was the watch I happened to be wearing during those moments, during those special moments throughout my life. So I didn't, think so much about the watch. But now that I look at this, I'm reminded of those times, in a way. So it can work in those ways as well. Both ways. Like, you can either have something that you really wanted and then you're enjoying it and you're taking it to places, or you're just wearing something that you didn't think about too much, but you're having these special moments in your life, and that's stays with you, that, like you said, a bookmark in your life. Yeah Awesome stuff.
That's what really intrigues me about the Apple Watch Ultra, because for me it bridges the gap between smartwatch and a watch that I can make memories with. So I'm very intrigued by that thing. I might buy one.
All right, Andrew, I'm gonna let you go. I don't want to take up more of your time. Thank you so much for coming on the channel. The Watchfinder and your storytelling was a way for me to understand watches and look at watches like I've never looked at them before. So it's you're doing amazing things for the community in terms of educating them, in terms of guiding them, without snobbery, which is a very, very, like, without any negativity, and that's a very inspiring thing. Thanks again for that.
Oh man, it's so kind of you to say. Thank you very much. And it's as much a privilege to be able to talk to you. For the people who may not be aware, it's 2 a.m. in Malaysia.
Now
so
it's
I'm
almost 3.
I'm impressed that you managed to string a coherent sentence together, let alone have an in-depth conversation.
This is the time when all the watch people are awake on the YouTube.
So thank you so much for sharing this time with me. I really do appreciate it, and it's been a real privilege to talk to you.
Thank you so much, and good luck with your own channel. I'm going to link it down below, and guys, make sure to subscribe to Andrew's channel and also hit the subscribe button down below, and have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.